what does risk look like? That's a great question. One is, what are the new capabilities that could emerge, like the Saronics and others, that could augment our sea power to provide that combat edge capability? But with more ships comes more maintenance. Do we have the small and medium shipyards to complement the large shipyards to do that maintenance? The president pushed out the desire and the order to build a 5th public shipyard.
Right.
We need that capacity, but that's not going to happen overnight.
No.
That's going to be a 10+ year process, billions of dollars. We absolutely have to do it because we've realized there's a great deficiency there. So this is the challenge, is like the demand's not going down. The supply is. The folks who are driving that supply are being asked to do Herculean things, and they're delivering. But as with anytime you expend energy, there's going to be a cost there.
Hello, everyone. This is Admiral Jamie Foggo from the Center for Maritime Strategy at the Navy League of the United States, just outside Washington, D.C. You're listening to Maritime Nation, the Center for Maritime Strategy's podcast designed to dive deeply into the policy challenges facing America's sea services and the role of the United States as a sea power on the global stage. Thank you to Jonathan Defense Group for sponsoring Season 5 of Maritime Nation. Let's jump right in. We're honored today to be joined by the Honorable Mr. Ben Kohlmann. Sir, thank you very much for being here. Mr. Kohlmann was sworn in as the 20th Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Manpower and Reserve Affairs on December 23rd, 2025. He is responsible for the oversight of manpower and reserve component affairs of the Department of the Navy, including the full spectrum of policy and programs for military personnel, active duty, reserved, and retired, their families, and the civilian workforce. That's a lot. Welcome to Maritime Nation, sir.
Thank you, Admiral. Honored to be here.
Great to have you. Now, you have the job that my friend and fellow Admiral Greg Slavonic had. Now, Greg is a seaman to Admiral, and he was the change of command speaker on my boat, the USS Oklahoma City. He's from Oklahoma City. Right. He's a NBC News executive, retired. He was over in the desert with Stormin' Norman, and General Petraeus wrote a book. All that's pretty cool. And now he's back in Oklahoma lobbying for the Navy. And one of the sponsors, his wife is a sponsor of the USS Oklahoma submarine. I saw in Newport News last week, and she's going to be commissioned pretty soon here in the near future. On the other hand, you're an F-18 pilot. You flew in combat, and then you built companies in venture capital. You did consulting, and now you're running manpower policy for the entire Department of the Navy. So how did that path from the cockpit to the boardroom to the Pentagon shape the way you think about people, talent management, and the sea services? Over to you, sir.
Yeah, well, absolutely critical. Learned a ton in the private sector, learned a ton in the public sector, having been, as you mentioned, a combat pilot, but also in the Navy, running some innovation organizations under Chief of Naval Operations Greenert, and then working for Bill Gortney when he was Fleet Forces Commander back in 2013 to 15.
I didn't know that. What'd you do for Admiral Greenert in innovation?
So I ran the Chief of Naval Operations Rapid Innovation Cell.
Oh, yeah.
Group of 15 disruptive junior officers. I was kind of the guy who recruited everybody.
Were you the most disruptive?
Well, I started a group called Disruptive Thinkers, so that's how I got recruited. But I put 3D printers on combat ships for the first time in concert with NAVSEA and others, which then I think has led to some of these contested logistics conversations. But it was great, and friends like Micah Murphy was on it, who and some other great junior officers who have now gone on to build great companies and also stay within the service. So that was kind of my first foray into formal innovation. And then the private sector, to be honest, kind of got smacked up the head for about 7 years trying to make my way in the private sector, but learned a ton about incentives and networks and talent management.
That's the only way to do it. Learn by the college of hard knocks. Huh?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think there's two things that I've really taken from the private sector that I'm mulling over right now. First is incentive alignment. The private sector has a lot more levers and tools, particularly on the finance side, to drive people to get to the outcomes you want. The government has to relate more on patriot time and patriotism and kind of mission and purpose, which is trade-offs there. And the second is the importance of relationships and networks. And I was thinking about this weekend as I was at the Tailhook convention, a phenomenal convening of folks. But I think one of the things that I'm trying to instill or kind of drive this mindset of is that, like, the relationships you have up and down the chain are far more powerful than we give that credit for in the service and the force. In the private sector, I was spending many of my days as a venture capitalist introducing good people to each other, whether it was founders to investors, founders to customers, great talent. I very rarely did that in the service. And even now, I've only started to do it again because it's just not part of our culture to have these informal relational networks that unlock so much. And this is actually what we discovered in the CNO Rapid Innovation Cell. These 15 junior officers from across the different parts of the fleet interacting in informal ways created insights and opportunities down the line that really blossomed something magical. So incentives and relationships are something that I think, I'm trying to reintegrate into the naval force.
That is fantastic. So, let me opine a little bit here and reminisce about times with Admiral Greener. I love Admiral Greener, not just because he's a submariner,
Sure.
but he was spinning 17 different plates at the same time. So when I worked for him as N81, the assessments branch, and then down the hall as N35B, he had me doing a lot of different things, payloads or platforms, future study, all the stuff you do at 81 for assessment. And then I really enjoyed being in N35B. And we started up the revision to CS21, the cooperative strategy for the 21st century. It was the first time we'd named names, China. And we also we did some pretty cool things regarding the strategy, a paper, Global Network of Navies. It was his idea to try to do something that was above and beyond the 1,000-ship Navy that Admiral Mullen had started. And then I think as far as mantras go, from his transition team, he had one of the best that everybody remembered. It was 6 words, 3 tenets. You probably remember that. Warfighting first, be ready, operate forward. When you went out to the fleet and you asked sailors, hey, have you heard of this? They remembered that.
Yeah.
Because they can remember 3 things and 6 words from Washington, D.C. that actually impacted their day-to-day. So I thought that was pretty cool. Brian Clark was working with us. I'm sure he was down the hall talking to you guys. And on additive manufacturing back then, 3D printing. I mean, it's really come a long way. And those seeds that were planted back then are bearing fruit today for Admiral Goucher as the DERPM.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And saving in manpower.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you been down to Danville?
I've heard a lot about it.
Yeah.
Haven't been there yet, but that's on the cutting edge of maritime industrial base advancement we need to have on the personnel and the technology side.
Well, if I say it here and somebody hears it, they're always looking for graduation speakers.
Oh, I would love to go down there.
Yeah, 3 or 4 graduation ceremonies, and it's amazing. It really is. The parents are there, the kids are there.
Yeah.
There's some veterans there. I mean, it's a really cool program, and makes you feel proud to be an American.
Well, if I could I tell a quick story about the additive manufacturing?
Yeah, please do.
When we first put it on the USS Essex, it was very controversial. Partly because of a $20,000 printer. NAVSEA wanted us to go through I think it was 8-month, $500,000 certification process. Yeah. And fortunately, there were some forward-leaning folks in other parts of NAVSEA that had already done some pre-work. The commander of the USS Essex, when we asked him to put it on there, was very skeptical at first. What's this new machine coming out there? 9 months later, we came back to take it off because the trial period had stopped. And he said, I want this to stay on the ship. It wasn't necessarily because of the things they were creating, which were things like deck plates or bolts.
Yeah.
It's because he said that drove the creativity of our sailors to heights he hadn't seen before. They realized they had the capability to solve their own problems now. And that mindset percolated throughout the fleet. And so for me, 3D printing was less about the things, which were important, but about the people and saying, hey, we got exceptional talent and creativity in our force. How do we leverage technology to then drive that creativity for better operational outcomes? That integration of technology and people is a theme that I keep hitting on. A lot of people ask me, well, you're a venture capitalist, you're a startup guy. Why didn't you go in the acquisition path? People are the foundation of all great companies. People fight and win wars. I think the people element is something that we need to continue to emphasize, even in a technology-focused force.
Hey, thanks for that. And while you were talking, it brought back, a favorite story, and that was when I was back on my first boat, USS Sea Devil, 1983. The most popular school for guys that were electronic technicians, the nukes, because I hung out back aft with the nukes that everybody does when they're going through the pipeline, was micro miniature repair. And you would send these guys up to the schoolhouse in Charleston, and they'd be in there with a senior chief, E4s, E5s, E6s, learning how to take a circuit board and take it apart and repair it. Find the Zener diode or transistor. We use chips nowadays. But we migrated from that fixing your own stuff on your own ship to black box technology.
Yeah.
As a fleet commander, it used to drive me nuts. There'd be a destroyer out there have a problem. Oh, we can't go into this box because we void the warranty, so we'll have to send a tech rep out to the ship to fix it. It's like, that's nonsense. We got to get over that, and we've got to start getting back to, either fighting our ships hurt or fixing our ships on station. So with the 3D printer, if you have a problem with a piece of equipment, print it and fix it on board. So you started the trend that has now led to, what Admiral Goucher and the Derpham and the Amron, the Additive Manufacturing Squadron Commander, are doing down in Danville. And you'll love it when you go down there. Hey, next question. You founded Defense Entrepreneurs Forum. I'd love to hear about that, but that was when you were still on active duty, which is pretty cool. And you've run some startups since and advised on venture investment. What does the private sector understand better about recruiting, developing, and retaining talent that the Department of the Navy still needs to learn? And where does the military model, on the other hand, actually outperform industry? So you kind of get to give us the balance of both.
Yeah, great questions. I'll go back to the incentive piece, particularly on the private sector, and a focus on finding exceptional talent as the key unlock for all the great exponential growth that we've had. People are on a Pareto scale as well. 20% of the people do 80% of the work. I'd even contend 1% of the people drive 99% of the outcomes when it comes to the private sector stuff. You mentioned the Defense Entrepreneurs Forum. The way that we found the first board members of the Defense Entrepreneurs Forum, which was all junior officers, I think we had a couple of 04s there, were people who were writing in industry blogs or military blogs. A lot of these niche publications, it was in the midst of the Iraq and Afghanistan conflicts where junior officers and field grades were coming back with some deep lessons learned about their experiences. And in frustration or as other outlets, they started write. And so the individuals that we recruited to build the Defense Entrepreneurs Forum, we had found on places like Small Wars Journal and War on the Rocks and other publications, because these were self-selecting individuals that, were taking the risk in career, but wanted to push the network and the people forward.
Yeah, roger that. Yeah.
And in the venture world, at the end of the day, pre-seed and seed investing is a lot on talent scouting. I remember some of the pitches I got from a guy named Soren, who now runs Neuros. He was a 20-year-old guy going to Ukraine on his own dime, drone racing. And no one knew in 2022 that this was going to be mission critical, but you could just tell from the way he talked about the world. I think of Isaiah Taylor, who's at Valor Atomics, 22-year-old guy, grew up on food stamps, never graduated from high school or college, is now building mass-scale nuclear reactors. Again, crazy idea 5 years ago, but this guy's drive and approach and talent, you can see this seep through. And as a result, he attracted unbelievable talent to drive this forward. I think in the military, we tend to have everybody's an interchangeable widget approach. You got to go the golden path. If you're exceptional strategy, but you have to go to your training officer tour or train the next level aviators, the organization absolutely needs that. But how do we find the really unique skills that these folks have and put them into exponential outcomes within the organization? We're very good at doing the thing we have to do tomorrow, the operational execution. We're less good about carving out that talent to really accentuate their skills. Now, on the flip side, what does the military do well? As I've reflected on this 10 years out now, aviation in particular, the debrief, self-reflective process that we have is second to none. The ability to tear apart a flight, to kind of look internally, what did I do wrong? One of the things I used to do as a flight instructor was I would come into every flight debrief and start it with the things that I did wrong in the flight to make it a safe space for my student to then share what they did wrong, to then drive that feedback loop of excellence. That's something I think we do exceptionally well. I'll also say on the edges, we do incredibly hard things incredibly well. Had the chance to go back to the carrier for the first time in 12 years a month ago, and just being on
what was that like?
Oh, it was actually a deeply emotional experience.
Which carrier?
It was the Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah.
So we were out there for RIMPAC.
Yeah.
And one of the questions I get asked as
It's my favorite exercise.
Oh, it was unbelievable.
Yeah.
It's like, do you miss flying? And for the past 12 years, I was like, not really. I did it. It was great and awesome. But I need to do something else in my life. I was on the MV-22. We came into the Case 1 stack, and I saw this carrier emerge in the back, and I started welling up with tears because it was it brought me back to 2009, being in the Case 1 stack, a perfect day in the Pacific. You're like, what we did is absolutely unbelievable. We landed on that carrier deck, and I was like, I'm home. And so the military gets the job done in the most difficult of circumstances, and that persistence and determination is unparalleled.
That is a fantastic story. Thank you very much for sharing that. And, one of the things that you mentioned about all these entrepreneurs brings back memories. I've been here about 5 years running the Center for Maritime Strategy, and we've seen a ramp up like I never would have expected. But 5 years ago, I was at Sea Air Space, and this young Navy SEAL came in that wanted a meeting named Dino Mavroukas.
Oh yeah, I
And he
love
hooks
Dino.
up, yeah,
Yeah.
he hooks up with, a member of the Lehman dynasty.
Yep.
These two guys formed Saronic,
Yeah.
and they were a startup back then.
Oh,
And
yeah.
now you look at where they are
Right.
with the financial backing and the
Yeah.
products and they got their own shipyard.
Yeah.
And then the Corsair
Yeah.
goes out and rescues these two guys in the
Absolutely.
Apache. Absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
An incredible story. And it gives me confidence that even though we've had some setbacks in some
Yeah.
areas, that the American innovation, things
right.
you worked on for Admiral Greenert,
Yeah.
and our industrial machine will soon surpass
Yeah.
our adversaries that are surrounding us. And, frankly, I say it all the time, 40 years of service, I have never seen the U.S. surrounded by so many people
Right.
that are trying to hurt us. And, it's just something we have to take into account every day.
Well, to that point, one of the paradoxes of the defense innovation movement in a good way and an opportunistic way is, and we were an early investor in Saronic in my past life. That was the fastest 48 hours to getting the memo to decision, because I'll be honest, a lot of the stuff we were briefing CNO and others in 2012,
Yeah.
these companies were now developing in 22, 23. I knew what was coming. We were able to invest in them because we have that click. But you look at guys like Dina, you look at guys Steve Sinemi, who's running Allen Control Systems. You look at a lot of these startup founders who were ex-military building these incredible systems. The question I keep asking is, had the military done it right, we could have retained these people.
Oh, yeah.
Now, the government, we need the things that they're building.
But
why?
maybe we shouldn't have, because they're
Well,
doing
exactly. But why did they have to go to private industry
Yeah.
to develop
Oh, yeah.
revolutionary
Good point.
outcomes
Yeah.
without
Yeah.
keeping them in the service?
Right.
And as we're doing great on retention and recruitment in general, but as I think about the talent flight and the opportunities in the market being pulled, those same founder mindsets that build these great companies, I guarantee we have 25, 30, 35-year-old strategists, both enlisted and officers, that are equally as brilliant. How are we pulling them up in the current moment? You look at innovation in World War II, you look at innovation in Vietnam and Korea. A lot of this was coming from the edges at the crucible of combat. We do not have a good way of identifying and then putting those people in positions of influence and authority to drive strategic innovation change. That is a paradox that I'm wrestling with right now. There's some pockets of excellence, but how do we think about our career paths to really get that talent to the fore?
Excellent point. Excellent question. I was just talking to Admiral Scott Swift the other day. He was out at Tailhook. Did you make it out there?
I saw him actually. He was 2 seats down at the
No
the
kidding,
banquet,
really?
so that was great. Yeah.
He
Yeah.
said, it's one of these inflection points in the curve as we're looking at the future of, hybrid warfare and all the stuff going on in the Arabian Gulf. Time for the aviators to get together, circle the wagons and talk about how we're going to take this on in the future.
That's right.
And before I get to my next question, which is a tough one, I ask you this one, kind of a softball, but have you had a chance to sit in the simulator for the F-35?
I've only walked by it.
Yeah.
I need to.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen the cool
Yeah, I was
setup
going to
and
ask you,
mock-ups.
different,
Yeah.
you're an instructor. So,
Right, I was, but only in the baby Hornet. So I'm
Yeah,
a couple
yeah.
generations removed. But
Okay.
yeah,
All right.
I
Well,
need to.
when you do that,
Yeah.
you'll have to let me know what you think.
Will do.
So hard question for all of us, really. Recruiting's been a headline challenge across the services for several years now, and retention pressures are just as real once the sailors are in uniform and they've made that first or second deployment. It's tough. They got to come up with some decisions that are the best for themselves and their families. USS Gerald Ford set a record in its recent 330-day deployment. That's pretty tough on our people and our ships. We had Admiral Lanzalata in last week for our Congressional Maritime Intensive, and he gave a wonderful presentation to the professional staffers on his time at sea, both in command of USS Ford, Gerald R. Ford, and also as the strike group commander. They did have 9 port visits in that 330-day period. And they contrast that with Lincoln. Pragmatically, we just can't do that in the Arabian Gulf when we're in the middle of a fight.
Right.
And we've seen what happened in places like Bahrain where it was hit. So some of our traditional logistics nodes were either reduced in capability or not available. So I understand that. But it's pretty tough on our people. So I ask you as MNRA, where do things stand today, and what levers as MNRA do you control to try to move the numbers for retention in the right direction?
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the macro and then we'll go
Sure.
into the micro.
Yeah.
On the recruiting front, 22, 23 were very tough years.
Yeah.
But 25, 26, crushing it, knocking out of the park, Navy and Marine Corps both.
Now, what do you attribute that to?
Two things. One, I truly believe the president and SecWar's focus on this warfighting first culture has reinvigorated why people serve. And as I go around the fleet, I've talked to a number of folks who are like, 25, I was thinking about getting out, but this refocus on standards and excellence and the warfighting outcome, it's like why they joined in the first place. That matters. Also, deep credit to specifically Navy Recruiting Command. Under Admiral Cherico and then Admiral Waters, their operationally intensive approach to daily stand-ups, operational meetings, really incredible integration of technology from Salesforce into dashboards that gets down to the recruiting center level and the MOS level or the rating level. They can see in real time where gaps are emerging. And then, it's not just about getting angry at someone, hey, fix that. It's like, hey, what resources can we flood the zone with to make sure that we're hitting this? Navy hit their recruiting targets 3 months early this year. Marine Corps even earlier than that. Marine Corps in 2027 has already basically filled up the first 6 months of their recruiting requirements at the thing before the fiscal year even starts. So crushing it on recruiting. On retention, writ large, we've grown the Navy by 20,000 folks in the past 3 years. Again, Admiral Cherico's work has been unbelievable here. I think we're at 352,000 top line sailors right now. We were at 330 previously. We're seeing increased number of sailors want to stay in. Now let's talk about the micro because there are some challenges there. I think 3 areas that I'm keeping watch on are naval aviation, mid-grade officer retention, surface warfare, mid-grade officer retention, and submarine second tour enlisted service ratings. There are some other ones on the edges like cyber warriors and others, but those 3 in particular of the scores of ratings are the ones that we're focused on because we're seeing some real stress there. One of the differentiating factors of those compared to other ratings is there is deep competitive pressure on the outside world. The market has a vote. Aviators in particular, two trends there that are driving this outcome. One is airlines are hiring like gangbusters. And this is not new in naval aviation history, but the airlines are already thinking 5 years out. The amount of pay you get as a first year, not to say a 5 and 10 year, is exponentially more than it was in the past. For nuclear trained officers especially, the nuclear renaissance, which I love from the startup world, is actually pulling a lot of exceptional talent from our officer corps, as enlisted corps, and the civilian workforce on the nuclear pipeline that previously didn't have as many outlets. And to be honest, the defense tech boom is creating a lot of opportunities, not just for aviators, but for experienced military folks who can go into private industry, have stock options, still build for their country and serve, but have a better financial outcome. So that's pressurized. Same with the cyber workforce. Okay, so what do we do to get after it? This is a lot harder. For aviation in particular, there's things we can do, and we've heard this consistently. Pay is not meeting scale. So think about how we do aviation incentive pay. What are the right bonus structures? We have CAGs, Commanders of Air Group, and carrier skippers that are sometimes making less than their department heads. We need to keep those department heads with dollars. How do we make a more smooth compensation package? Talking to an old 2-star yesterday who was a CAG of mine. He said his son at an 05, which I think is great, aviation makes more than he did as a 2-star because of all the bonuses.
Yeah.
That to me is not an aligned incentive process. Now, there are some congressional limitations, statutes we got to figure out, but how do we make those incentives align in the right way such that if you get promoted to 06 or 07, you're not taking a de facto pay cut? Like, that's wild to me that the math works out that way. We got to figure that out. Also thinking about location. I was a Lemoore guy for 4 years. To be honest, Lemoore is a tough place to be.
Yeah.
And we're seeing deep retention
and that's the only
challenges
place the F-35 is, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah,
Well,
I've heard that too.
And one of the challenges with F-35 is because there's now commonality with F-35 and the National Guard units is if you go to Top Gun, for instance, get a patch in F-35, like your demand is off the hook elsewhere in the country. And you can say, you know what, maybe I hop over to San Diego, or I hop over to Boston, or I hop over to Atlanta where they've got a nice National Guard unit because they're begging for my skill sets. That's a really inner service competitive pressure we got to figure out. So how do we flood the zone with human performance initiatives, with better things for families in Lemoore? How do we drive the wait time to get on base from 90 minutes to 30 minutes to 15 minutes with the right manning levels for MAs? Like, these are all opportunities and options we have. We now, because we have seen the problem, have the ability to focus on to try to solve it.
You are listening to Maritime Nation, the Center for Maritime Strategy's podcast designed to dive deeply into the policy challenges facing America's sea services and the role of the United States as a sea power on the global stage. We aim to provide you with the highest quality analysis on the most pressing maritime security challenges by joining in conversation with key experts and practitioners. This season is produced with support from Jonathan Group Defense. Jonathan Group is an industry leader in rugged mechanical packaging solutions for critical electronic systems on land, at sea, and in the air. Jonathan Group designs and manufactures rugged and shielded rack mounting architecture, shock and vibration analysis and assemblies, as well as integrated systems, backplanes, and chassis for embedded applications. More than 65 design and manufacturing engineers operate over 650,000 square feet of manufacturing floor space across North America to deliver solutions deployed in unforgiving environments. They are recognized and distinguished by a proven track record that has garnered the trust of top leading defense, aerospace, industrial, and server data storage corporations. Jonathan Group's ultra-precise engineering and high-fidelity manufacturing support our surface ships, aircraft, and submarines. They keep our sensitive electronic equipment high, dry, and shockproof. If it's still working, it's Jonathan. Thanks very much. That was a great narrative. You raised a number of issues. I can remember when I was promoted to my first star, back with Admiral Stavridis in 2009. My wife says, "Hey, what happened to that sub pay?
Yeah.
What happened to that bonus?" And I was like, "I'll make it up to you."
Sure.
And, for me, that was a sacrifice worth taking,
Yeah.
in order to be a flag officer and continue to lead the United States Navy. However, as you point out, you want to keep the talent. It's
Yeah.
part of talent management, so you have to offer incentives so that those young 1-stars and 2-stars aren't stolen away by industry.
Yeah.
I got one thing that might help you out, and I'll
Yeah.
shamelessly advertise. I'm the chairman of the George and Carol Olmsted Foundation for Olmsted Scholars. First one was Carlisle Trost in 1960, and I am one myself. We're doing pretty well. We send about 19 officers overseas every year from all services, including Coast Guard and Space Force.
Yeah.
We're doing pretty well in the Navy. We've got real talent in the submarine force, real talent from the surface Navy. On the aviation side, we get a lot of helo pilots. We don't get a lot of pointy-nosed aviators like yourself, guys flying the F-18. The reason for that is because the pipeline is so tight.
Yep.
But as an incentive, this is a great program. Learn a foreign language, go to a foreign university, get a master's degree for 2 years with your family. If you want to have, this is a time to kind of let your hair down. If you want to have a family and have kids, it's perfect. So I would throw that over to you, sir, and ask that you please take a look at it.
Yeah.
Perhaps, talk some of those guys flying the F-35 or the F-18 to come and try the program out.
Well, let me sit on that for a little bit, because that's actually close to my heart. One of the reasons I left active duty in 2015 was I wanted to get a graduate degree, and was fortunate to get into a top-notch program at Stanford for the MBA program.
Wow.
Number one
Great
school in the
program.
country.
Yeah.
There was no pathway for me to do that in naval aviation.
Yeah.
And it's not because they frowned upon graduate education, but to your point, the pipeline is so tight, and we need instructors, we need people at sea to do that stuff. It's really hard to squeeze that in. But to the Olmsted conversation, and this gets into aviation retention directly, I've been doing a bunch of roundtables with junior officers in 04s just to understand what the feeling on the fleet is. And was in Oceania talking to some of these folks. And one of the Wizzos, he wanted to be an Olmsted scholar. He did everything he needed to do, came to the Bureau, and again, they were optimizing for the system. They had to put this guy in. They told him no, because we needed to go to production tour. We are so short on aviators. Again, from the systemic level, it makes sense. But that guy is now leaving the Navy because he did not get to get the graduate degree that he wanted. And again, we can't accede to every single personal desire and
Right.
wish.
I understand.
But that broadening experience overseas, being there, learning a language, interacting with allies, I think we need to take a harder look at what the organizational benefits are that maybe supersede some of the important but community-focused things that we have. And to be honest, the secretary asked me to look at graduate education and how we think about that in our officer corps, and are we incentivizing it properly? there's work to be done. There's a lot of policy stuff that we need to work through. There's manning, but for me, I think it's something we need to continue to look at deeply because I can't tell you how important it was for me to spend 18 months in the center of Silicon Valley with 95% plus civilians to understand how the world actually worked outside of the military. And then with that skills, now bringing it back in this role, I'd like to think that's a value add to the organization. How do we allow that opportunity for other military officers who know they want to stay in to then have that infusion of understanding?
Yeah, no, my classmate, Mike Murray, great friend of mine, I'll see him at our 45th here in a couple weeks. Stanford grad submariner, left the Navy, went to Stanford. He gave me a personal tour of the campus. What a beautiful place. And then into the Hoover
Yes,
Institute,
right.
with incredible brains like Condi Rice, and former naval officers and joint force
Yep.
officers like Gary Roughhead, who are there doing fantastic work. Well, that's absolutely super. Another thing you mentioned, on the enlistment side, we're meeting our quotas now. I know that that this is a full court press, but Admiral Muddy Waters has done a great job in that. We put a 2-star in charge of recruiting, and things started to turn around. So BZ to him and his team. At one point, I was getting letters and notes from concerned contemporary flag officers, retired, that we were dipping into the surge tank because I may be using the wrong term. We had a deferred enlisted
Yes.
program for the Navy,
Yep.
and deferred enlistment. You could wait 6 months to a year, get ready,
Yeah.
get your affairs in order. And we just said, okay, we've got to have recruits now. So we pulled those folks forward and sent them off to RTC. Are we building that checkbook back up again now that we
Yeah.
have had success in recruiting?
Absolutely. And again, this is to Admiral Waters' credit, having that strategic view. And I needed to get up to speed early on. I had some questions about that. But these are approximate numbers. I don't know them off the
Yeah.
top of my head. We do, we'd like to have a 50% depth, which means like if we have 100, say we have around 50,000 sailors we have to do, we like to have at least 1,000 sailors in the pipeline to kind of fill those gaps.
Yeah.
We dipped down from about 50% in 2019, 2020, down to about 20% to meet
Mm.
what minimal goals we could read in 22, 23. I think we're back up to 45%.
Wow.
And so this is a
great.
combination of we're meeting our recruiting targets and we're recruiting enough to be able to refill that depth moving forward. So again, Admiral Waters has been the key driver on all this with Caesar's work as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Both of them, Caesar and Admiral Waters, doing a great job. Okay, your portfolio spans the active force, the reserve component, families, the civilian workforce, plus force resiliency, naval education, as you mentioned, with the Olmsted Scholar Program we talked about, and the Board for Correction of Naval Records. Sir, you have my sympathies. As director of the Navy staff, I had the portfolio for, metro tickets, parking, real estate. If you walked around with a tape measure, people would slam the door in your face. You're coming to take my office.
Yeah.
BCNRs, audit, that was my nemesis for about a year. And of course, we failed.
Yeah.
And we're getting better. The Marines have passed.
Yeah.
And the thing I loved the most about the job was Naval History and Heritage Center, Sam Cox, and the USS Constitution. Technically, I wrote the fit rep for the CO, so I was a Commodore. And I used to take a trip up there. I think I made it two times in a year, a chief's initiation, everything else. But you have a little bit of each of those things in your portfolio. How do you prioritize across such a wide mandate, and where do you spend most of your time right now? And I'll tell you where, unfortunately, you spend 90% of your time on 10% of the people, and that's typically, conduct-related things.
Right.
Yeah. Is that the same for you?
It is. And that's something I've been thinking about deeply. I think one of the most important assets we have as senior leaders is our time. And as you know, from the roles you had, your calendar gets filled up very quickly. With a lot of stuff. But to the point about the individual stuff, as I was prepping for this job, I had a chance to speak to a number of former ASNs. One of them was Admiral Slavonic. Another was a young man when he got this role in the Reagan administration. Spent about 3 hours in his living room in Houston. Unbelievable man. And he said, Ben, one of the most important and sacred things you're going to do in this job is provide that civilian oversight for the young men and women who get in trouble. And you reading the cases end to end to make those hard decisions. To some extent, they're just names on a list. And you get hundreds over the course of a quarter. But each of these is an individual choice. Do you let them stay? Do you let them go? Is it another honorable, honorable, because those have material impacts on
Oh
their
yeah,
lives.
yeah,
And so
huge.
I have personally devoted time and attention to BCNR cases, to the admin sep cases, to the promotion cases in a deep way. And a lot of these are really hard.
Yeah,
I mean, they're tweeners, and you have the evidence from the DCMNRA or CNP, and then you're weighing kind of their personal statements and what the purpose and mission is. I personally like it. I think in another life, I would have liked to have been a judge
yeah,
because I love
yeah,
objective
yeah,
analysis. So for me, that's an important allocation of time. But if you're spending, 50% of time on onesies and twosies when you got a million plus people, how do you think about the right distribution of time and effort there? I've also kind of realized, and this might be my shortcoming in ability to get stuff done, is even as a senior leader, you got 2-3 years, you are incredibly fortunate if you can push 3 things through. Maybe you get one in those time frames. So as I got into the role, I had a very clear what winning looks like document with my priorities. And to be honest, I looked through those. I've not made as much progress as I wanted to because there are so many other important things that are happening. But as I get kind of the 7-8 month point, it's like re-snapping myself to like, why am I here? Why am I leaving Dallas for 5 days a week with my kids down there to do this job? Mission critical. Let me refocus and reshape my calendar to go against this. It's hard to prioritize, but man, what a great opportunity to serve our country again.
yeah. You know, I laud you, sir. So you're one of the first people that have told me that you have deep dived into these cases and looked really, really hard at the pros and cons and the tweeners. And of course, whenever the government gets involved, whether it's the Navy or any other aspect of the service or the government, the amount of information or evidence just piles
Yep.
up uh, to the disfavor of the person who's gotten in trouble. I'll tell you, one guy that I did the same thing for when I was Naval Forces Europe, Naval Forces Africa. I took a look at this package because I heard about it. Scuttlebutt. I said, bring that up to my level. Let me take a look at it. The guy had some family problems, relationship issues with a marriage that had gone south, alcohol, and performance just took a nosedive, right? And so the system documented all that.
Mhm.
The system documented poor performance, and the guy said, "Hey, I've had a really tough time in my life, for the last couple of years, 18 months, and this is not me. I love the Navy. I want to stay, and I want a second chance." And everybody lined up and said, "Throw him out."
Mhm.
And I brought him in and gave him a wire brushing personally, and then I asked him, what did Tom Hanks say to Private Ryan in the movie at the end?
Mhm.
And he looked at me like, and he just kind of froze.
Yeah.
And he couldn't remember, or he was just
Yeah.
kind of frozen at that
Right.
point in time because may have been intimidated. And he said, earn this.
Yeah.
You got a second chance.
Yeah.
Take it, buddy.
Yep.
And he didn't screw up.
Yeah.
So,
That's right.
I laud you. I mean,
Yeah.
it's an inflection point or a branch in somebody's life
Yeah.
that, OTH, their life is never going to be the same.
Yep.
You get a second chance,
Yeah.
maybe in 50% of the cases,
Yeah.
you bring them back. Yeah.
Well, I'll say, and just bring it back to strategic level on that topic, though, is, we have civilian control of the military for a reason in our country. And I think it's one of the great blessings we have compared to other entities. And the services, as I read these, are doing the best that they can to drive good order and discipline. And we need it. And civilians are statutory in the loop, on the top of the loop for a reason to provide that. What is the American public? What is their view? And, that's a broad statement, but how would they want to treat this sailor who might be going through a challenging moment? I'll also say, and again, having seen how staff work works, like there's so many things going on, you want to be concise. Sometimes the 1 or 2 page summaries I get, and even the paragraph long briefs that the Samuels, my JAG who briefs me on this brings, they are getting to an important essence of the thing. But as you dive in, there's really important nuance that different people have different approaches to things. As I weigh it, I come out in a different area because it hasn't been surfaced. Again, they're all doing their job, but
Yeah.
like I read through probably 300 pages literally of a really complex case that a lot of the service summary did not reflect the reality of the case. And we're going to probably give this guy a second chance because what he wrote, the level of detail he had, I was persuaded. And like, I am a persuadable person. I have very strong hypotheses about the world, but you bring data, you bring understanding. I'm going to change my mind if you can do so. And I want to give those service members a chance.
Absolutely. And for those who may be in opposition to what you and I just talked about, my mantra was, yeah, if warranted, I'll give a second chance, but I won't give a third chance.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
And by the way, I agree with the services in most cases. Like there's clear evidence to support a lot of the maneuvers we're making.
But it always rates a
Yes.
deep dive,
Absolutely.
especially when somebody's future is at stake.
Yeah.
How do you define ready when it comes to the force's people, and not just the platforms, but where's the department falling short of that definition today? And, I've talked to some of the flags about this active duty as we've revamped and reconstituted Naval Sea Systems Command. And I think there's an interest in taking some more risk. So are you willing to do that with personnel as well?
I absolutely am. Readiness, people have different definitions. For me, is can you deliver the combat power when required by National Command Authority with the level of excellence and quality they expect? You look at what's happening in Iran, you look at what's happening in Venezuela from an operational and tactical standpoint, we're delivering what we need. And as you and I both know from a maintenance and readiness perspective, every time you deploy a ship or a capability into combat, you are pulling from that readiness bank. Now, it's the role of senior decision makers to make that trade-off of is it worth it or not. But I think one of the things that over the past 20 years we've done, and again, having worked for Admiral Bill Gordon at Fleet Forces with the OFRP process, we had some really strong, the Navy has always had strong demands on its needs. The demand for naval power is exponential.
Amen.
Not getting better.
Amen. Yeah.
And the supply has been dwindling for a variety of reasons.
We need more carriers.
We need more. We need more of everything. More carriers, especially. But in the 2010 to 2015 timeframe, we made some increased risk by 1% to drive operational outcomes that the president told us to do. That adds up over time. And so you think about the 9, 10, 11-month deployments we have right now. Those are longer than they have been in the past, but they're not that much different than what we've done from 2015 to 2026, incrementally increasing. Because as we have fewer carriers available, as the maintenance avails take longer, as it's up till this moment harder to attract people to work in the maritime industrial base, those have stretched out and our supply on the edge has been less and less. What does risk look like? That's a great question. One is what are the new capabilities that could emerge, like the Saronics and others, that could augment our sea power to provide that combat edge capability? But with more ships comes more maintenance. Do we have the small and medium shipyards to complement the large shipyards to do that maintenance? The president pushed out the desire and the order to build a 5th public shipyard.
Right.
We need that capacity, but that's not going to happen overnight.
No.
That's going to be a 10+ year process, billions of dollars. We absolutely have to do it because we've realized there's a great deficiency there. So this is the challenge, is like the demand's not going down. The supply is, the folks who are driving that supply are being asked to do Herculean things and they're delivering. But as with anytime you expend energy, there's going to be a cost there.
Yeah, amen. I mean, that book that may or may not be on camera, Returning from Ebb Tide, talks about the atrophy of the commercial maritime industry in this country. It's 55 shipyards World War II to 19 with Reagan, down to 7 productive yards that can actually build a warship today. There's synergy between the commercial side and the military side, and we've lost that.
Yeah.
We lost incentives back in the Reagan era, and now less than 0.5% of merchant ships on the high seas are flying an American flag, and 50% are flying a Chinese flag. Unacceptable. So we went out and did a study on the industrial bases of 5 different countries, not to advocate for building ships there, but to bring their best practices back to us. And one of the things we have to have is more capacity. So I am all in favor of a 5th public yard and expansion of our maritime industrial capability in this country. You'll get no argument from us. Thank you for the answer to that question. So you've been in a seat since December of 2025, coming in from outside the traditional Pentagon career track. Yes, you were in the military, but you've gone out and done great things as an entrepreneur. What surprised you most about manpower policy and how it actually gets made and implemented once you're inside the building? And has anything changed your perspective on this since you were sworn in?
Mm-hmm. For me, it's been a deeper appreciation of the role our civilian workforce plays. I came into this role and To be honest, back in 2012, 2013, when I met the ASN then, who was very forward leaning, I was like, in the future, God willing, this would be a great job to have the direct personnel policy.
Yeah.
Well, now I'm here. I think I thought I'd spend about 60, 80% of my time on military topics. I probably spent 80+% of my time on the civilian workforce, the 200,000 folks who are doing important foundational work down below. I think a big opportunity.
That's encouraging, actually.
Yeah. I mean,
I used to hear when I was in Naples, hey, nobody pays attention to us, and we got an
Right.
executive director over there to help them out.
Sure. Well, this is the opportunity, though, is I think because we haven't paid as close attention to them, the career path development, the talent management, the operational excellence of where people go has not been as well developed.
Yeah.
And so if we think about like the pipeline from GS14, GS15 to SESs, that's very nascent right now. Immense level of opportunity. We had an SES offsite for all the SESs, senior executive service members, about a month ago. The secretary and under and CNO and CMC came and talked, and people were very appreciative for their words. And as an after action, I said, hey, we did a survey. Who are 5 GS15s that you think are like top notch? We probably got a list of 100 folks from that. Right now, we just don't really know where our talent is and how to create a structured pipeline. If you want to be an admiral, you can go talk to admirals as an 0506 as a defined career path.
Yeah.
If I take this job, I'm on track. If I don't take this job, I'm off track. All that type of conversation. It's not as clear in the civilian world. And as we think about things like shipbuilding, acquisition, even talent management, if we don't have as robust of a talent management approach and tracking system and really kind of encouraging and incentivizing talent on the civilian side, man, that's 200,000 folks that we are not helping to reach their full potential in service to this thing that we call the United States Navy. And, to the credit of what OpNav and others have done, Matt Schwartz has done incredible work now running the OpNav for CNO Caudal. A data-driven risk modeling approach to saying, hey, where are the parts of our civilian workforce that we're struggling at that we didn't have visibility into otherwise? As an example, with the Iran war ramping up, we realized that we have a small but important cohort of civilian weapons loaders and handlers on the East Coast. As we looked at that footprint and how aggressively they were being used, we saw deep risk there. We now have the data modeling to look across the force and say, hey, you guys are doing really well in this component, but man, this area is really suffering. We know this is mission critical. How do we flood resources there to recruiting, to retention, to driving the right incentives, to have those foundational functions really in support of our warfighters? So this 21st century look at our workforce, I think is a huge opportunity we're continuing into.
That is fantastic and very encouraging that you're doing that, particularly for the civilian workforce. We talked about Admiral Greenert earlier, and when I transitioned from N81 to N35B, one of the things he asked me to do was to, take a look at a pipeline that would help build or inculcate a group of people in the Navy that think and write and execute maritime strategy. So we started a program called the Naval Strategic Enterprise. And there is a subspecialty code up at the War College that's still in existence today where you can get your strategy subspecialty. And the goal wasn't to, make a cookie cutter approach where, you produce a Jim Stavridis by going through exactly the same pipeline. Admiral Harry Harris used to tell me it's different for everybody. And, going off and doing these different jobs gives you the perspective that could make you a better strategist. But what we did try to do was to come up with a mentorship program for these folks. And I would say you just articulated something for the civilians that we never got off the dime when I was there at DNS or at NAVIR, NAVAF, and that is a mentorship program. Mark Honecker started this when he was at Fleet Forces for a number of years. And by the way, he's on our Navy League Board of Directors. And Matt Schwartz, as you said, is taking it forward. So bravo, Zula, on that. The civilians in the Navy are equally as important as anybody in uniform and helping us drive this train and do it well.
Well, that's one of the questions. I actually sent a survey to those at GS15 saying, hey, how are we doing? I said, do you have a mentor? Do you want a mentor? And I'd imagine the answer to that is hopefully
it should be yes.
But it's probably going to be no. And if it's no, that's an opportunity. Let's lean into that and make it work.
Yeah. Well, I would imagine that most people would want to talk to somebody about their career pipeline.
I hope so.
Half the time you don't even know the jobs that are available that you could go to enhance career development, right? And that's true in the active force.
Well, so let me pull the string on that a little bit. And this gets into AI. One of the things
I was going to talk about that next.
Yeah, so 300 SESs, right?
Yeah.
Right now, when an SES job comes available, people say, hey, I know these 2 or 3 people that would be great for it. Let's put them in the pipeline. Maybe you get a couple outside candidates. What we started to do is take all of the dossiers of all of our SCSs and even some GS-15s and run it through an AI algorithm and say, hey, this is the role. Here's the 3 core problems to be solved. Here's the skill sets we need. Who else in our force is qualified? And what's interesting is we've emerged 5, 6, 7 candidates for some of these roles that wouldn't have otherwise been identified. They may not have known the job existed. We can now proactively reach out to them and say, hey, we think you might be a good fit for this job. Why don't you throw your name in the hat and see if, you going through the interview process, you can make it happen. So with AI and data integration, these digital twin ideas, we can better match talent to the job to be done in ways that we couldn't previously to better match that talent skill.
Yeah, so let me dive into that a little bit here. It's our last question, and it's how the Navy manages people, how you manage people as M&RA with AI-enabled systems. So is there going to be a different reserve force construct, a career path construct, or something else entirely? So the great fear now amongst young people who are trying to get a job in the marketplace is AI is going to replace me. Should that fear be manifest in our Navy civilian community or our military community? Is it in the cards that AI is going to do away with some of these jobs? Or is it, and kind of where I come down on it, it's a tool for enhancement of what you do day to day? And as M&RA, what do you say? What's the future? What's your view?
This might be a bit of a contrarian view, but I think as technology progresses and integrates, the human in the loop is going to be more important than ever. Human on the loop, I should say.
In or on? That's
I think
interesting.
both. I think it could be both.
Yeah. How do you define on?
Yeah. So in the loop is like you're intermixing, you're creating all the things. Human on the loop is like reviewing the process. So I'll give you an example from the Manpower world. One of the things Marine Corps has done really well is their promotion board process, their digital board approach, how they do their fitness
Marines
reports.
Are squared away.
No, they're great. I mean, and I've sat in a lot of promotion boards, everywhere from 05 to 07, 08, just to kind of observe the process. And the Navy and Marine Corps are very different.
Good for you.
Yeah, I mean, I've loved that. Talent management, that's my thing. What the Marines have done is they basically used AI in 2 ways. One is, it used to be that a general officer who's going through the 06 board would have to sift through 100 pages of PDF documents and like make their best judgment on what their briefing's going to look like. Right now, AI does the first draft for them. And so instead of having to add to the thing, the human on the loop is subtracting the excess stuff that isn't necessary based on their expertise. What they've found from an execution standpoint is they've driven the board time down by 25 to 35%, which frees up excess time for these senior leaders to go back to their day job with no difference in quality. The second thing they're doing is, say you've got 100 records and you had 10 board members. Each board member would get 10 records to do the briefing guide on. Well, via the vagary of statistics and probability, you may get all 10 bad records and all 10 good records. So your assessment of what good and bad looks like might be miscalibrated across the board process. And so that creates some churn. What they've done is they put all these records into AI and create a shadow 1 through N ranking, and then distribute those in an equal way to all the board members so that they are getting a statistically representative sample of what a great record looks like and what a poor record looks like, such that in their briefing process, they're now being able to cue in their mind what good and bad looks like. That way, when they come to the holistic conversation, they've already been predisposed to what the full distribution looks like. This creates more fruitful and even conversations. So this is where the human in the loop is the difference is like, again, the human is not having to do the full briefing. It's now modification to adjusting. You can still go on the record and look at it, but most of the work's been done for you. It's that QA on the system to ensure it's meeting the quality standards.
That's fantastic. And along those lines, kind of an ancillary question here. I can remember when Admiral John Richardson, my boss, was Chief of Naval Operations. He's right down the hall here. He's going to be the next national president of the Navy League. We're so fortunate to have John here. Brilliant intellect. John loved the kind of psychologist, philosopher, Daniel Kahneman, who passed away about a year or two ago. Wrote some great books, Thinking Fast and Slow. Yep. And John had consulted him about a revision of the officer fit rep. How do you evaluate and assess character versus competence? So warfighting competence, warfighting qualifications versus character. And we'd had some problems there. Where do we stand on that? Did we ever redo it? I don't think we did.
So we've had a number of fail attempts in the past decade.
Yeah.
Part of it was technological, part of it was philosophical. That got nowhere. And we're still using NAVFIT 98. It's remarkable as an aviator. The frontline fighter in 1998 was the F-14.
Yeah.
I flew the frontline fighter Super Hornet. We now have the F-35 in the front lines. We've gone through 3 generations of fighter aircraft. deep capital intensity, and we're still using NAVFIT 98 today, 30 years later.
Hmm.
That's a big opportunity.
Yeah.
As I've sat in the boards as well, I don't think I appreciated this as a junior officer, even a mid-grade fighting fit reps. The fit rep right now is a communication device almost exclusively to the board. And what the board is discerning from that fit rep is different than what you might expect given what all the write-ups are. I go back to Thomas Jefferson. How did he build the quad at University of Virginia? He didn't put any pavement down at all. He had a grass field, let the students wander across, and where they wandered, you now see where the pavings are. That was the natural discerned thing. There is interesting things happening based on the fit rep structure that are outside what it was designed to do to solve specific problems in the process. Don't want to reveal anything too much, but we are working on what does the next generation fitness report look like, not just from a technology standpoint. You don't want to just replicate the needs of the past and apply it new technology overlay, but what problems are we solving? There's almost two distinct problems to solve. One is what's the right communication method to the board? How can we take what the discerned reality is, like the Block 43 write-ups that everybody spends all their time on, like maybe just the boards I've gone to, about 2% of the time is spent on that. The others is the whole career progression. What are the numbers? What are like the number one with bold or stars, or is it all caps or not all caps? Like there's another a discerned assessment going on that you could quantify in a consistent way that gives drop-down opportunities. I think there's an opportunity also to identify what is this person top 5% in the world at? Not necessarily from a promotion standpoint, but to feed into the data system to say, hey, we have this emergent need. I need a Chinese speaker who's a surface warfare officer, who's an exceptional computer programmer. I don't know if I can do that right now in the service, but sometimes that would emerge. If you can tag those things with some tracking mechanism, that's an immense opportunity. The second thing, though, is what is the communication and feedback mechanism to the service member themselves? Because the fitness report is written for the board, that's a different customer and audience than just whatever you're going to communicate to me as a commanding officer to the junior officer level. Maybe that thing gets burned up a week later. It's not in the record, but how do we drive those conversational pieces that drive that feedback loop? And this is meaningful to me. When I was a junior officer at the end of my 3-year tour, I thought I'd crushed it. I'd never failed a check ride. I was the head of the JOPA. I was a scheduling officer. I walked into my fit rep debrief and I was like, I'm going to get the number 1 for sure. Surprise, I did not get the number 1. I didn't even get the number 2. My commanding officer had a hard conversation about my interpersonal relationship with my other junior officers and how I was honestly acting arrogant and not giving them the time of day in the right way. That was a wake-up moment for me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if every junior officer has been given that opportunity. How do you create a system that allows that hard feedback to happen without the board having to see every little nick and scratch on your record? I think there's an opportunity to do that in the right way. And to the credit of what CNP is looking at right now, I think we got an interesting path forward, a lot of work to be done. I think there's details to work out, but in my mind, if we can get that right in the next 2 years, that is legacy defining because that's the foundation of talent management in the Navy.
Fantastic, sir. And as always, last word to you. Anything we missed, anything you want to say, anything you want to leave our audience with today?
Well, this is the greatest job in the world. We're a capital-intensive force, but at the end of the day, it's men and women who fight and win our wars, and that's my focus.
Outstanding. Folks, that's a wrap. Thank you to the Honorable Ben Kohlmann for joining Maritime Nation. I'd like to thank our listeners for joining us each month. If you haven't heard our previous episodes, you can always catch up on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Google Podcasts. Episodes are all content described here, and all content described here today can be found on our website, www.centerformaritimestrategy.org, all lowercase. Thanks to Jonathan Defense Group for sponsorship and support, and thanks to James Peterson, our venerable sound engineer. Stay tuned for the next episode of Maritime Nation.